Grief has a half-life. It doesn't vanish. It just settles into the background radiation of your life, a constant, low-grade hum of absence. For 2 years after Mom was gone, that hum was the soundtrack to my drives down Elm Street. I never stopped, not fully, just slowed the car to a crawl, my tires whispering against the old asphalt, and let my eyes drink in the only monument my parents would ever have. The house was a modest, 2-story colonial, the color of faded bone, with forest green shutters that Dad had painted himself one sweltering August weekend. It wasn't grand, but it was proud. It stood its ground. Every scuff on the hardwood floor was a story. Every chip in the kitchen countertop, a memory. It was the one stable thing in a life that had often felt like walking on a frozen lake, listening for cracks. That Tuesday evening, a year after the sale, the hum of grief was quieter than usual. I'd had a good day at the architecture firm. A design was finally clicking into place. And for the first time in a long time, the hollow space in my chest felt less like a cavern and more like a room I was learning to live in. I took the turn onto Elm out of habit, a pilgrim on a well-worn route. And the monument was gone. I slammed the brakes, the car lurching to a halt. My heart did the same. For a dizzying second, I thought I was on the wrong street. But no, there was Mrs. Gable's sprawling oak. There was the fire hydrant I'd crashed my bike into at age 10. But the house was wrong. The faded bone was now a stark, brilliant white. The cherished green shutters had been replaced by sleek black modern ones. A wide wraparound porch I'd never seen before now dominated the front, complete with a swing. The roof was new. The windows were expansive, energy-efficient panels. It was a stranger wearing my childhood skin. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "It sold fast," Sam had said. "A quick, clean sale. Below asking, but a fair price in this market." We both walked away with a little over $200,000 each. Life-changing for him, a painful but necessary severance for me. This was not a $200,000 renovation. This was a gut job, a luxury rebirth. This was the kind of money you poured in when the asset was yours, free and clear. The first treacherous thought was a whisper. Maybe the new owners are just very wealthy. Then I saw him. My brother, Sam, emerged from the front door, laughing. He held the door open for a woman I vaguely recognized from a Christmas photo, Lena, his girlfriend. She was followed by a bounding golden retriever, a creature of pure, uncomplicated joy that skidded down the new porch steps. Sam looked healthy. The perpetual worry line between his brows had vanished. He wore clothes that looked soft and expensive, a far cry from the discount store polo shirts he'd lived in after his layoff. He put an arm around Lena, pulling her close, and they stood there, on my father's lawn, surveying their kingdom. The world outside my car window went silent. The hum of grief was drowned out by a rising metallic shriek in my ears. I couldn't breathe. The air in the car was thick, suffocating. I fumbled for the window button, gasping as the cool evening air hit my face. I saw the contractor, Joe, then. Old Joe, who'd patched our roof more times than I could count, was hauling a tool belt out of his pickup truck parked across the street. He saw me, did a double take, and raised a hand in a slow, hesitant wave. I don't remember getting out of the car. I just found myself standing on the sidewalk, my legs feeling like wood. "Joe," I said, and my voice sounded strange, ripped from somewhere deep. "The house, it looks different." Joe spat on the pavement, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Yeah, your brother's really done it up, turned it into a real showpiece." "The new owners must be thrilled," I said, the sentence feeling like a betrayal in my own mouth. Joe squinted at me, his leathery face creasing in confusion. "New owners? Son, there ain't no new owners. Sam bought you out, didn't he? Said he made you a sweetheart offer to get the place for himself. Smart, if you ask me. Got it for a song before pouring all this into it. Must have doubled its value already." The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds, crashing into each other. Bought me out. Sweetheart offer. For a song. He said we were selling it to a third party. We split the proceeds. Joe's confusion melted into a slow, dawning, uncomfortable pity. He looked down at his boots, then back at the beautiful, monstrous house. Oh, hell. I just assumed he was so hands-on with the Reno, talking about his home. I thought you knew. The ground beneath me felt unstable. I saw Sam look over, his smile freezing, then shattering when he saw me talking to Joe. The easy confidence on his face crumpled, replaced with flash of pure panic before he mastered it, giving me a tight, hesitant wave. I didn't wave back. I turned, got back into my car, and drove away. I drove without a destination, the perfectly detailed schematics of my life collapsing into rubble. He hadn't just sold the house. He'd sold my half. He'd taken my trust, my need for a slow goodbye, and he'd used it as leverage to steal the one thing I thought we were both losing equally. He hadn't just taken a house. He had performed a surgery on our past, removing me from the narrative and writing himself in as the sole heir. The hum of grief was gone. In its place was a new sound, cold and sharp and clear. The quiet, deliberate click of a lock turning. The confrontation happened 2 days later. I needed the time. I needed to be sure I wasn't having a psychotic break. I went to the county recorder's office, my hands trembling as I pulled the digital deed. There it was. The transfer of title from the estate of Margaret and James Wilson to Samuel James Wilson. No third party, just him. The sale price listed was a fiction, a number far below the true market value we'd agreed to represent for the sake of taxes. The number he'd convinced me was a necessary evil for a quick sale. I drove to our house. He was waiting for me. He must have known I'd come. He was standing on that obscenely perfect new porch, a mug of coffee in his hand, trying to look casual.
The dog was lying at his feet, thumping its tail warily. "Hey," he said. His voice was carefully neutral.
I didn't return the greeting. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, refusing to set foot on them. They weren't mine to stand on anymore. "Joe seemed to think you lived here?" Sam's jaw tightened. He took a sip of coffee, a stalling tactic I remembered from when we were kids and he'd broken a window. "Let's talk inside. We'll talk right here." He sighed, a theatrical sound of long suffering. "Look, I was going to tell you. When you finished building your goddamn widow's walk? When you were grilling on the patio you built over Mom's rose bushes? See, this is what I knew would happen," he said, his voice rising with a defensive heat. This sentimentality, this refusal to move on. It's a house, not a shrine." "Don't," I snarled, the sound ripping out of me. "Don't you dare pathologize my grief to justify your lie. You told me we were selling it. You looked me in the eye and you lied." The mask slipped completely then. The feigned reasonableness fell away, and what was left was raw, ugly calculation. "Fine. You want the truth? You were clinging to a ghost. I needed a foundation. You wanted to mourn, I wanted to live. So yeah, I made the numbers work." Made the numbers work. He said it so casually, as if he'd found a clever tax loophole, not dismantled the last remaining artifact of our family. "You made the numbers work," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You presented me with a fake sale, a fake price, and you used my trust as your fucking down payment. You didn't buy me out, Sam. You stole my inheritance. You stole my goodbye."
"I gave you exactly what you agreed to," he shot back, his face flushing. "You got your money, every cent you were promised. What does it matter what I did with my half?" "Your half?" I laughed, a hollow, broken sound. There was no your half. There was our parents' life, and we were supposed to dissolve it together. You didn't want to dissolve it. You wanted to absorb it. You're sleeping in the room Mom died in. Are the walls still the same color? Did you at least have the decency to repaint?" He flinched, finally. A real reaction. "Good." "I needed this," he said, his voice dropping, pleading now. "You have your life, your career, you have stability. I had nothing. I was drowning. This saved me." And there it was, the ultimate trump card in his mind. His need, his desperation. It was the same argument he'd used our whole lives. "I'm the younger one. I'm not as together as you. I need more help." Our parents had always softened for him. I had always softened for him. He was betting on that softness now. But the softness was gone. In its place was permafrost. "I write," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "You were drowning, and you decided to climb on my back and push me under to save yourself. You didn't just take a house, Sam. You took the version of our parents I was trying to protect, the version that built something that lasted, the version that taught us about honesty. You've turned them into liars and enablers by proxy. You've made their final wish, stay brothers, into a sick joke."
I turned to leave. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. "So what now?" he called after me, a challenge in his tone. "You gonna sue me? Good luck. The paperwork is clean. You signed everything, you got your money, it's legal. I stopped but didn't turn back. I looked down the quiet tree-lined street where we'd learned to ride bikes, where Dad had taught us to throw a spiral, where Mom had waved to us from the porch 1,000 times. Legal? I said softly, almost to myself. This was never about what was legal. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing on his ill-gotten porch. The rage was there, a white-hot coal in my gut, but it was secondary. The primary emotion was a grief so profound it was geological. He was right about one thing. I couldn't sue him. The law was on his side. He was a cheat, but he was a meticulous one. But as I drove, a new blueprint began to form in my mind, not of a building, but of a reckoning. The law deals in money and property. It doesn't deal in ghosts. It doesn't deal in stolen goodbyes. It doesn't hear the sound of a mother's final wish being snapped in two. He wanted a foundation? Fine. I was an architect. I knew all about foundations. I knew how to pour them, how to reinforce them. And I knew with a cold, certain clarity exactly how to make one crack. The following months were a study in cold detachment. I went to work. I designed buildings. I ate. I slept. But a part of me was always in a quiet, soundproofed room in my mind, working on the problem of Sam. Suing him was pointless. A public scene would only cause us both pain and likely end with the same result. He'd keep the house, and I'd be the bitter older brother who couldn't move on. He'd win the sympathy vote. No, this required a deeper understanding, a more architectural solution. I started with what I knew. Sam was not a bad businessman. He was a desperate one. He was clever, but he lacked foresight. His layoff had shattered him, and this house was his Hail Mary, his one big score to reset his life. But a play this reckless was never made in a vacuum. It was made by a man who believed he was out of options. I began to dig, quietly, professionally. A former colleague of mine knew a guy in private banking who owed him a favor. A few discreet lunches, a vague story about a family trust issue, and I had a shape of Sam's financial landscape. The house had a mortgage, a sizable one. He'd taken my $200,000, and he'd likely used a chunk of his own $200,000 for the lavish renovation. But the scale of the work, the premium materials, the high-end fixtures, the new porch, the roof, meant he had to borrow, heavily. The initial purchase price was a steal, but he'd leveraged that equity right back out to fund his new life. He wasn't just living in the house. He was balancing on it, a house of cards built on a single, fraudulent card at the bottom. The girlfriend, Lena, was a new variable. I did some social media digging. Her profiles were public, a curated gallery of their new life. Hashtag renovation journey, hashtag our home sweet home, hashtag blessed. There were pictures of them in the gleaming new kitchen, on the sprawling porch, in the master bedroom that once was our parents'. In one photo, she was holding a mock-up of an architectural magazine cover photoshopped to feature their house. The caption read, "Dreaming big, maybe one day, at Home and Hearth magazine." An idea, fragile and nascent, began to stir. I learned more about Lena. She was an interior stylist, a freelance one with a small but growing following. This house wasn't just their home, it was her portfolio centerpiece, her ticket to bigger clients. Their shared dream was built on my stolen ground. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I was going through the last of Mom's boxes, the ones I'd kept in my garage.
I'd been avoiding them, the pain too fresh. But now I approached them with a new purpose. Beneath a stack of old photo albums, I found Dad's old leather-bound portfolio. He'd been a draftsman, a man who loved the clarity of lines on paper. Inside, among his careful architectural drawings of minor home additions and garage layouts, I found it. The original, hand-drawn schematics of our house, the ones he'd done himself before a single foundation hole was dug. The paper was brittle, the lines faded but precise, and there, in the margin, was a note in his familiar blocky handwriting, a note I'd never seen before. It was a list of suppliers, of material grades, and one line, circled. Permits finalized with county. Variance approved for rear setback. Lot line as per survey by Cartwright & Sons, 1978. The survey. I spent the next weekend at the county archives, breathing in the dust of decades. I found the building permit file for our address. And there, tucked behind the permit applications, was the original property survey from Cartwright & Sons. It showed the precise boundaries of our lot, the position of the house, the easements. I held it up, my heart thudding against my ribs. Then I pulled out the photos from Lena's Instagram, the ones of their glorious new wraparound porch and the expansive stone patio they'd added to the back. I am an architect. I understand scale, proportion, and the unyielding law of property lines. The new porch on the left side looked close, too close to the neighbor's lot line. And the new stone patio in the back, it sprawled. It reached far into the backyard, towards the rear fence. A cold, clean certainty settled over me. Sam, in his rush to create his dream home, in his arrogance at having gotten away with his grand theft, had likely not bothered with new surveys or permits for his extravagant renovations. He'd used Dad's old plans as a guide, not understanding that renovations of that scale, especially those encroaching on setback lines, required a whole new level of bureaucratic scrutiny. He had built his kingdom on a flawed survey. He had built without permission. He had made a critical, structural error. I made high-resolution copies of the original survey. I went home to my quiet, sterile apartments that held no ghosts, and I spread the papers out on my dining table. I superimposed the images from Lena's Instagram over the survey lines, using known dimensions for scaling. The left side porch encroached on the side yard setback by nearly 4 feet. The beautiful new stone patio violated the rear yard setback by a good 6 feet. It was a violation, a clear, actionable, legal violation. A smile, the first genuine one in months, touched my lips. It felt strange on my face. He thought the game was about money. He thought because he'd given me my share of the cash, the board was clear. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. I was playing a different one, a game of ghosts and permissions and the unyielding weight of the truth. He wanted to live in our parents' house? Fine. I would make sure he lived in its shadow every day. I would use the very rules and order our father believed in to dismantle the lie our son had built. The demolition was about to begin. Patience is the mortar of revenge. You cannot rush it. You must let each layer set, each calculation solidify before applying the next. I became a ghost in the machine of my brother's life, an unseen force applying quiet, relentless pressure. My first visit was to old Joe, the contractor. I found him at a diner, hunched over a cup of black coffee and a piece of cherry pie. He looked up as I slid into the booth opposite him, and his eyes held a weary understanding. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Joe," I began, my voice low and even. "I just need to understand. The work on my parents' house, the porch, the patio. Did Sam pull new permits for that?" Joe looked down, stirring his coffee with a slow, circular motion. He said he was handling it, said it was all above board. I just did the work I was paid to do. He was a good man, Joe, but he was near retirement and needed the paycheck. I couldn't blame him. "But you never saw the permits? The updated surveys?" He met my gaze then, his own filled with a quiet shame. "No. I asked once. He told me not to worry my pretty old head about it." He pushed his pie away, his appetite gone. "It's not right what he did to you. Your dad, he was a straight shooter. This would have broken his heart." "I know," I said softly. "I'm not trying to break Sam, Joe. I'm just trying to correct the plans."
I left him there, with his cold coffee and his conscience. The next step required a less friendly face. I went to the city zoning and code enforcement office. I didn't go in raging. I went in as a concerned citizen, a knowledgeable architect with a potential, albeit anonymous, tip. I spoke to a weary-looking official named Gale, whose desk was a monument to bureaucratic pile-making. I showed her the copies of the original survey, and then I showed her printed, high-resolution photos from a concerned neighbor who wondered about the legality of the new structures. "I can't say for certain without an official survey," I said, my tone professional, helpful. "But from a layman's perspective, looking at the original lot lines, there appears to be a significant encroachment on both the side and rear setbacks. It's a beautiful renovation, but if it's not to code, it sets a dangerous precedent for the whole street." Gail took the papers, her eyes scanning the documents with the practiced boredom of someone who sees neighborhood wars every day. But she nodded. "We'll send an inspector out. If there's a violation, we'll issue a notice." That was all it took. A single, anonymous nudge. The machine, slow and grinding, was now in motion. The wait was the hardest part. I forced myself not to drive down Elm Street. I didn't check Lena's social media. I immersed myself in work, designing a library annex, losing myself in the purity of lines and load-bearing calculations. It was a comfort, this world where structures had to follow rules, where gravity and physics were the only arbiters, not the slippery morality of a desperate brother. Weeks passed. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was instantly. "We need to talk." It was Sam. I didn't reply. Let him stew. Let the uncertainty gnaw at him. An hour later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. On the fourth call, I picked up. "What?" My voice was flat. "Did you do this?" he hissed, the words trembling with rage. "Do what, Sam?" "Don't play stupid. The city, they've red-tagged the house. They're saying the porch and the patio are illegal. They're talking about fines. They're talking about demolition." I could hear the sheer, undiluted panic in his voice. It was a beautiful sound. "That's unfortunate," I said calmly. "I assume you pulled the proper permits for the work?"
There was a long, charged silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears in his brain seizing. You know, I thought the contractor, this is your fault, you sent them. The city tends to notice when you build a small fortress in a residential neighborhood without permission, I said. It's not my fault you decided to cut corners. You were always in such a rush, Sam. Look where it's gotten you. You're trying to destroy me, he screamed, the sound raw and ragged. No, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You did that yourself the moment you decided to lie to me. I'm just here to witness it, and to make sure you don't get to enjoy the spoils. I hung up. My hand was steady. The white-hot coal of rage had cooled into something else, a cold, polished stone of resolution. This was only the beginning. The official notice of violation arrived at his door, a piece of paper with the force of law behind it. I knew because Lena's Instagram went dark for 3 days, and when she posted again, it was a vague, melancholy shot of a wilting flower with the caption, "When life gives you lemons, #stressful times." Sam tried to fight it, of course. He hired a lawyer, an expense he could ill afford, to petition the zoning board for a variance after the fact. This was my cue for Phase 2. I attended the public hearing. I sat in the back of the drab, fluorescent-lit room, a nondescript man in a navy blue jacket. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Sam and his lawyer stood before the board, making their case. They presented pictures, talked about the improvement to the neighborhood, the increase in property value. Sam looked haggard. The easy confidence from the porch, long gone. He was a man watching his dream home turn into a financial abyss. The encroachments were an honest mistake, his lawyer pleaded. My client relied on outdated information. Granting this variance would cause no material harm to the neighbors and would save my client from a significant financial hardship. The board chairman, a man with the skeptical air of a lifelong public servant, leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Wilson, these are not minor encroachments. We're talking about feet, not inches. Granting a variance for this scale of violation sets a terrible precedent. What's to stop everyone on the street from adding 4 feet to their homes?" It was then that I stood up. I didn't approach the podium. I simply walked to the side of the room where the public could leave written comments for the record. I placed a single, sealed envelope on the table. It was addressed to the zoning board. Inside was a copy of the original survey, with the encroachments clearly marked, and a short, typed letter. It read, "To the members of the board. My parents, James and Margaret Wilson, worked their entire lives to build and maintain their home at blank Elm Street address. They believed in doing things the right way, with honesty and integrity. The current situation is a betrayal of that spirit. Granting this variance would not only be illegal, it would be a profound disrespect to their memory and to the rules this community is built upon. I urge you to uphold the code." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The context was clear. As I turned to leave, I caught Sam's eye. He was staring at me, his face a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. He had seen me. He knew. The board denied the variance unanimously. The victory was not sweet. It was austere, like a sip of cold water. This wasn't about winning. It was about balance.
The consequences were immediate and cascading. The city gave him 30 days to bring the property into compliance. He had 2 choices: somehow move the massive foundation-based porch and patio, an endeavor that would cost tens of thousands of dollars, money he didn't have, or demolish them. He chose demolition. I watched from my car down the street on a crisp Saturday morning. He'd hired a small crew with sledgehammers and a single skid steer loader. I saw him standing there, shoulders slumped, as the first swing of the sledgehammer connected with the elegant wooden balustrade of his prized porch. The sound of splintering wood was sharp and final. Lena was inside. I saw her silhouette in the window, watching, her hands pressed to her face. They worked all weekend. The porch came down. The beautiful stone patio was jackhammered into rubble. The house, when they were done, looked maimed, raw, wounded, with a scar of fresh dirt and broken concrete where his dreams had been. The house was back within its legal boundaries, but it was a husk. The curb appeal was annihilated. The value he had added was now subtracted, with interest. He had his house, but he no longer had his showpiece. He had a problem. A very expensive, very public problem. The dog barked at the pile of debris in the front yard. Sam just stood there, covered in dust, looking at the ruins of his own making. I started the car and drove away. The ghost in the machine had done its work, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. The foundation had cracked. Now it was time to see the whole structure fall. The demolition of his additions was a financial and emotional bloodletting, but it was not the fatal blow. It was the wound that weakened the prey, making it vulnerable to the final, closing jaws of consequence. Sam was now trapped. He had a massive mortgage on a house that was no longer the crown jewel of the street. The renovation debt was still there, but the asset had depreciated. The Instagram dream was over. Lena's feed shifted to minimalist interior shots, carefully avoiding any windows that might show the devastation outside. The #OurHomeSweetHome disappeared. I knew his type of desperation. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals make mistakes. I kept a distant watch. My source in banking provided occasional anonymized updates. Sam was missing credit card payments. He'd taken out a high-interest personal loan. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, but the walls were closing in. The stable foundation he thought he'd stolen was turning to quicksand. The final act was triggered, as these things often are, by an external force. An email. It was from a former neighbor, Mrs. Gable, the one with the sprawling oak. She was a sweet woman in her 80s who had baked us cookies when we were kids. Her email was brief. "Dear my name, I hope you're well. I wasn't sure who to tell, but there's been some commotion at your old house. A for sale sign went up yesterday. I thought you should know. With love, Agnes." A for sale sign. He was cutting his losses. He was running. This was the moment. This was the checkmate I had been patiently, coldly arranging. I knew he would be desperate for a quick sale, just as he had pretended to be the first time. He couldn't afford to hold on. The banks were circling. He would have to list it at a competitive, even aggressive price. I formed my final plan. It was a simple, elegant, and utterly ruthless piece of strategy. I created an LLC, an anonymous corporate entity, a common enough practice in real estate. I gave it a bland, forgettable name, Steadfast Property Holdings. I used a lawyer from 2 towns over to handle the paperwork. There was no trail back to me. Then I contacted a real estate agent, a sharp, ambitious woman named Carla,
and tasked her with making an offer on the Elm Street property on behalf of my LLC. I gave her specific, non-negotiable instructions. "The offer is to be all cash," I told her over the phone, my voice digitally altered by a simple app. "Faster closing, but the offer is 20% below the already reduced asking price. It's a lowball, take it or leave it offer." "He may not go for it," Carla cautioned. "It's quite low." "I think he'll go for it," I said with absolute certainty. "Just present the offer. Emphasize the cash. Emphasize no contingencies. Emphasize a 10-day close." I knew he had no other choice. He was drowning, and my offer, however insulting, was the only oxygen left. Carla called me 2 days later. She said, "They accepted," a note of surprise in her voice. "The seller's agent said they were highly motivated." Motivated, a polite word for desperate.
The paperwork was executed electronically. I signed for Steadfast Property Holdings. He signed for himself. He had no idea who was on the other end of the transaction. He was just relieved to be getting out from under the crushing weight of his own deception. The closing was held in a title company office. I didn't attend. My lawyer handled everything. Sam was there, I was told, looking thin and pale, signing the documents that would sever his last tie to the house, selling it for a loss that would likely wipe out his entire inheritance and leave him in debt. The ultimate karmic justice. He had stolen the house through a lie about a sale, and now he was losing it through a sale to the very person he had stolen it from. The day the sale was finalized, I drove to Elm Street one last time. The for sale sign was gone. I parked and just looked. The house stood there, silent. The scars of the demolished porch and patio were still fresh. It looked tired. It had witnessed too much. I took the key from my pocket, the agent had given it to my lawyer, and walked up the path. The lock in the new, solid front door turned with a smooth, heavy click. I stepped inside. The air was different. It smelled of new paint and vanilla-scented candles, but underneath it, like a stubborn ghost, was the faint, familiar scent of wood polish and my mother's lavender sachets. They had changed the layout, opened it up, but the bones were the same. The staircase I'd slid down as a child was there, the living room where we'd put up countless Christmas trees. I walked through the empty rooms. My footsteps echoed on the refinished hardwood. I went upstairs, to my old room. It was now a yoga studio, with mirrors on one wall. I then stood at the door of the master bedroom, where Mom had taken her last ragged breath. It was a generic guest room now, beige and impersonal. I felt no triumph, no glee, just a vast, echoing sadness. This was never about getting the house back. It was never my goal to live here, surrounded by the physical form of so much pain. This was about reclaiming a narrative, about restoring a balance that his lie had violently upset. I had won. I had outmaneuvered him, outthought him, and I had broken him financially and emotionally. The karma was complete, poetic, inevitable. But standing in the hollow silence of the house, I realized a final, painful truth. Mom's last wish, stay brothers, was impossible. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. The betrayal was too deep, the retaliation too absolute. We were no longer brothers. We were just two men, bound by a shared history that had now become a war memorial. I left the house, locking the door behind me. I stood on the porch, the original small one that Dad had built, and looked out at the street. Mrs. Gable waved from her window. I waved back. I had a plan for the house. I would donate it to a local charity that helped families in transition. It wouldn't be a shrine to my parents, nor a trophy of my revenge. It would become what a house should be, a shelter, a foundation for a new beginning for someone who truly needed one. It was the only way I could honor my parents' memory without being poisoned by the bitterness of the recent past. As I drove away from Elm Street for the final time, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The past was finally, truly, behind me. The ghost was laid to rest. The hum of grief was gone, replaced by the quiet, steady sound of my own engine carrying me forward into whatever came next. What would you have done? Would you have walked away? Or would you have fought to reclaim what was taken from you, even if the cost was a part of your own soul? The line between justice and revenge is often blurry. Where do you draw it?